Hey everyone! Welcome to The Young and the Restless. I'm Jane, and I'm so excited to have you here. If you love Young and the Restless, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Alright, let's dive right in. The Young and the Restless synopsis for Tuesday, August 5th shows that Victor Newman shuts down Audra Charles's business and Billy Abbott will be furious over Jill Abbott's secret. Kyle Abbott will attempt to calm Claire Newman down at the park and advise her to stand back before making any regrettable choices. Claire, however, will continue to be furious with Victor and will ultimately compare him to Jordan, who likewise prioritizes resentments and feuds over Claire's happiness. Audra finds Claire and Kyle on a park bench while she is out for a run. As she recounts all of their numerous drink meetings, Audra will have the chance to fabricate a story about Kyle leaving a phone charger in her sleeping car. Even though Kyle will be clearly upset with Audra, Claire won't seem to mind. Actually, once Kyle joins her at the Tack house, Claire will bring up the topic of moving in together since she will be more interested in discussing it. Kyle will question Claire's commitment to carrying out that plan, but Claire will make it plain that she is tired of allowing Victor control her. Claire and Kyle are getting ready to move in together, and Victoria Newman will give her blessing. Nikki Newman, who will not be pleased with Victor for ruining Cole Howard's Memorial Day and his relationship with Claire, will be the target of his defense in the interim. Victor will later call Audra to the ranch and declare that their agreement is nullified because she was unable to stop Kyle and Claire from dating. Victor will insist that he is cutting off all support for Vibrante and shutting it down, while Audra will act as though she has set a ticking time bomb that is still about to detonate. Phyllis Summers will pretend that Billy is being overly cautious about Kane Ashby's plans in the GCAC suite. After boasting about her own devotion to Kane, Phyllis will irritate Billy by pointing out that he wants to take back control of Chancellor in order to deceive Jill. Kane will briefly defend Jill to Billy while Phyllis answers Summer Newman's phone call in the hallway. Billy will discover that Kane and Jill have been communicating as a result. Kane will acknowledge that he got back in touch with Jill because Colin Atkinson wanted to see her before he passed away. It turns out that before going to Colin's funeral, Jill visited the chateau and spent his final days with him. Billy will inquire as to whether Jill was aware that Kane was Aristotle Dumas, but Kane would pretend that this has nothing to do with his business goal. But when Phyllis comes back, Billy will continue to demand an explanation. Billy will learn all he needs to know from Kane's silence over what Jill knew. In the end, Billy will call Jill for a video conference, and she will complain since his animosity is hurting her. Billy will show her that Kane is in the room with him and advise that Jill break his heart instead. Didn't you know about him all along? On Tuesday's edition of YNR, Billy will say, "You knew that he was keeping the secret from everybody, including your son." Billy will be worried that Jill will refuse to acknowledge it or claim that he is overreacting once more, but she will not do either of those things. Instead, Jill will appear guilty as Billy yells, "That's what I thought." According to previews for The Young and the Restless, Billy will continue to be enraged with Jill for her deceit, so keep an eye out for what lies ahead in their relationship. Jill's secret exploded like a bomb across Genoa City, shattering what little peace remained in Billy Abbott's already chaotic world. It started with a whisper, an overheard phone call, a glimpse of panic in Jill's eyes during a Chancellor Winters board meeting, but quickly escalated into a storm that Billy could no longer ignore. For weeks, he'd felt something was off. His mother, normally sharp and in control, had been dodging questions, making private calls at odd hours, and canceling meetings without explanation. When Billy finally confronted her, expecting a minor issue or a strategic business play she didn't want public yet, he was blindsided by the truth. Jill had orchestrated a covert deal that risked not only Chancellor Winters' future but the very legacy Catherine Chancellor left behind. She'd funneled company resources into a joint venture with Audra Charles, giving Audra's struggling startup, under the guise of a media acquisition, a lifeline that tied their fates together. It was risky, reckless, and done without full board approval. But what made it worse was that Jill did it behind Billy's back, knowing full well how much he distrusted Audra. Billy felt betrayed, gutted, as though the one person who was supposed to believe in his judgment had not only ignored it but actively worked against it. His anger wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. All the progress he had made, the therapy, the effort to become more stable, the attempts to be a better leader and father, now seemed pointless. His own mother had excluded him from a critical decision, treating him like the impulsive screw-up he used to be, not the man he was trying to become. And that betrayal simmered, boiled, and finally erupted during a tense board meeting that quickly turned into a battlefield. Billy publicly confronted Jill, his voice raw and shaking, calling out her secrecy, her manipulation, and the danger she'd put their company in. Jill tried to defend herself, claiming she was protecting the company from stagnation, that she was trying to keep them competitive in an evolving media landscape, but her excuses only fueled Billy's fury. He couldn't believe she would ally herself with Audra, of all people, when Audra's reputation was stained with scandal and disloyalty. He reminded everyone in the room of how Audra had jumped from job to job, aligning herself with whoever held the most power at the moment, and how she had left a trail of burned bridges behind her. But Jill stood her ground, insisting that Audra had vision, and that the company needed bold, even uncomfortable moves to survive in a cutthroat industry. Still, nothing she said could calm the storm she had unleashed. Meanwhile, word of the partnership reached Victor Newman, and he was not pleased. In fact, not pleased was putting it mildly. When Victor got wind that Audra was leveraging a hidden deal with Jill to prop up her floundering company, he immediately saw it for what it was, desperation disguised as innovation. He had tolerated Audra in the past, even admired her tenacity at times, but he had never truly trusted her. She was clever, yes, and certainly capable, but her ambition often blurred the line between strategy and sabotage. And aligning herself with Chancellor Winters without his knowledge, knowing how many ties that company still had to Newman Enterprises through legacy projects, was, to Victor, an act of war. He moved swiftly, summoning his legal team and corporate advisors. Victor knew how to hit where it hurt, and this time, he didn't just want to isolate Audra, he wanted to dismantle her entire operation. With one carefully executed move, he pulled funding, revoked licensing agreements, and leveraged Newman's influence to sever supplier and advertising partnerships that Audra's company depended on. Within 48 hours, her media startup was in free fall. Audra, blindsided and livid, tried to fight back, claiming unfair business practices and even threatened to take it public. But Victor, calm and calculating as ever, merely smirked. "You play games in my backyard," he told her bluntly, "you better be ready to lose everything." And lose she did. Investors panicked. Clients walked. Staff abandoned ship. By the end of the week, Audra's company was little more than an empty shell, and she found herself standing in front of Jill with a venomous glare and a bitter ultimatum: either Jill salvaged the deal and helped her rebuild, or she would go scorched earth and leak everything to the press, the covert deal, the backroom negotiations, even the internal disagreements at Chancellor Winters. Jill, now cornered by the very woman she had hoped to champion, realized the full cost of her secrecy. She tried to defuse the situation, offering reassurances, even promising additional support, but the damage was done. Chancellor Winters' reputation was on shaky ground, Billy was no longer speaking to her, and Victor Newman had made it clear that this wasn't over. As the dust settled, Billy retreated to society for a drink, trying to process everything. The betrayal still stung. He replayed every conversation he had with Jill in recent months, searching for the signs he missed, the clues he ignored. He felt like a fool. And yet, part of him still wanted to believe that his mother meant well, that she was trying to protect the company, even if her methods were flawed. But that sliver of understanding was buried under a mountain of hurt. He knew he had to distance himself, not just from Jill, but from anything that reminded him of being kept in the dark. He reached out to Lily, seeking some clarity, and found comfort in her honesty. She admitted that she, too, had been left out of the loop and was furious at Jill's maneuvering. But unlike Billy, she wasn't as shocked. "Jill's always played the long game," she told him quietly. And sometimes she forgets that the rest of us are trying to grow, too. Billy nodded slowly, realizing that trust, once broken, was not so easily rebuilt. Across town, Victor sat in his office at Newman Towers, reviewing the aftermath with his signature stoicism. He hadn't just crippled Audra's company, he had sent a message to everyone who thought they could operate in Genoa City without accounting for his presence. Nikki had expressed concern, wondering if perhaps he had gone too far, but Victor dismissed it. In his world, business was war, and sentimentality had no place in battle. Audra had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. But the situation was far from over. Rumors were already swirling in the press about corporate shakeups, questionable alliances, and a possible investigation into insider dealings at Chancellor Winters. Reporters were hounding board members, and PR teams were scrambling to spin the story in a way that didn't destroy what was left of the company's credibility. Jill, exhausted and shaken, found herself in the unfamiliar position of having to clean up a mess she had created. She called a private meeting with Billy, hoping to mend fences, but he declined. "You made your choice, Mom," he told her over the phone. "Now you live with it." His words echoed in her mind long after the call ended. For Jill, it wasn't just about business anymore. It was about family, about trust, about whether she had finally pushed her son too far. Meanwhile, Audra regrouped, determined to salvage her reputation. She began quietly reaching out to other players, Tucker, Nate, even Adam, looking for a path forward. She refused to be taken down permanently. But she knew one thing: Victor had humiliated her, and she wasn't going to let that slide. She began gathering intel, compiling every shady deal, every hushed conversation she'd been a part of, preparing for the day she could strike back. Genoa City, once again, had become a battlefield of secrets, ambition, and shattered alliances. The fallout from Jill's decision rippled outward, affecting not just Billy, Audra, and Victor, but everyone connected to the companies at war. And in the shadows, other players began to stir, sensing opportunity in the chaos. Because in a town like Genoa City, power never stays in one hand for long, and the game was far from over. Jill's carefully guarded secret had been festering beneath the surface for months, a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate the fragile peace within the Abbott and Newman families. She had gone to great lengths to keep the truth hidden, weaving a web of half-truths and calculated silences, but secrets in Genoa City had a way of unraveling at the most inopportune moments. When Billy, ever the relentless investigator, stumbled upon the truth, whether by accident or through his own dogged determination, the revelation hit him like a sledgehammer. The betrayal cut deep, not just because of the secret itself, but because of the sheer audacity of Jill's deception. She had played them all, manipulating emotions and alliances to serve her own ends, and Billy, with his fiery temper and deep-seated sense of justice, wasn't about to let it slide. The confrontation was inevitable, a storm brewing on the horizon, and when it finally erupted, the fallout would be catastrophic. Billy's rage was white-hot, his words laced with venom as he accused Jill of tearing apart the very fabric of their family. She, ever the master tactician, tried to deflect, to minimize, but the damage was done. The trust between them was shattered, and Billy's wrath wasn't something that could be easily contained. His mind raced with the implications of Jill's secret, the ripple effects it would have on their business dealings, their personal relationships, and most importantly, his own sense of identity. How could he ever look at her the same way again? How could he trust anything she said moving forward? The betrayal was too profound, too personal, and Billy's next moves would be unpredictable, driven by a volatile mix of anger and hurt. Meanwhile, across town, Victor Newman, ever the puppeteer, was pulling strings of his own. Audra's company, once a rising star in the corporate landscape, had become a thorn in his side. Whether it was her ambition, her alliances, or simply her refusal to bow to his authority, Victor had decided enough was enough. He had tolerated her defiance for longer than most, but even his patience had its limits. With a single phone call, a carefully worded directive to his network of influence, Victor set in motion the downfall of Audra's empire. Contracts were cancelled, investors withdrew, and suddenly, the company that had seemed untouchable was teetering on the brink of collapse. Audra, always so composed, so in control, found herself scrambling to salvage what she could, but Victor's reach was vast, his resources limitless. He wasn't just pulling the plug, he was ensuring there would be no recovery, no second chances. The message was clear, no one crossed Victor Newman and walked away unscathed. Audra's fury matched Billy's in intensity, but where Billy's was explosive, hers was icy, calculated. She wasn't about to go down without a fight, and if Victor thought she would simply fade into obscurity, he had severely underestimated her. The chessboard was set, the pieces moving, and the stakes higher than ever. Jill's secret had ignited a firestorm, Billy's rage was a force of nature, and Victor's ruthless maneuver had left Audra with nothing to lose. The tension in Genoa City was palpable, a powder keg waiting for a spark. Alliances would shift, loyalties would be tested, and the fallout from these events would reverberate through every corner of their lives. Jill, Billy, Victor, Audra, each was a player in a high-stakes game where the rules were constantly changing, and the price of failure was everything. The days ahead would be fraught with confrontation, manipulation, and perhaps, for some, redemption. But for now, the dust was far from settling, and the chaos had only just begun. The weight of Jill's deception pressed down on Billy like a physical burden, his mind replaying every interaction, every conversation, searching for the clues he had missed. How had he been so blind? How had she managed to keep the truth buried for so long? The more he dwelled on it, the angrier he became, his thoughts spiraling into darker territory. He had always prided himself on being able to read people, to see through their facades, but Jill had outmaneuvered him at every turn. It wasn't just the lie itself that gnawed at him, it was the sheer scale of it, the way it undermined everything he thought he knew about their relationship. Was anything between them real? Or had it all been part of some elaborate game to her? Billy's temper had always been his Achilles heel, and now, with the floodgates of his rage wide open, there was no telling what he might do. He had already begun distancing himself from Jill, his words sharp, his demeanor cold. The rest of the family had noticed the tension, of course, but no one yet understood the magnitude of what had transpired. Billy wasn't ready to share the truth with the others, not until he had figured out his next move. Part of him wanted to expose Jill, to let the world see her for the manipulator she was, but another part, a smaller, quieter part, wondered if there was more to the story. Had she acted out of malice, or was there some twisted logic behind her actions? The uncertainty only fueled his frustration, leaving him trapped in a loop of anger and doubt. Meanwhile, Audra was facing her own crisis, her company's sudden collapse sending shockwaves through her carefully constructed life. She had poured everything into her business, her time, her energy, her reputation, and now, in the blink of an eye, it was all crumbling around her. The speed of it was what stunned her the most. One day, everything was fine, the next, her phone was ringing non-stop with bad news. Suppliers were cutting ties, clients were jumping ship, and her once loyal employees were eyeing the exits. Audra had faced setbacks before, but nothing like this. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a coordinated attack, and she knew exactly who was behind it. Victor Newman had made his move, and he had done so with brutal efficiency. Audra's initial shock quickly gave way to a simmering rage. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. If Victor thought he could destroy her with a snap of his fingers, he was in for a rude awakening. Audra had her own connections, her own leverage, and she wasn't above playing dirty. The battle lines were drawn, and she was ready to fight fire with fire.